Okay, welcome, sharpeners. Our event is about to begin. Just let our guests into the digital room here. Hope everyone's Thursday is going well so far. Thank you so much for making time for another event on behalf of Bentham Science Publishers. My name is Scott from SciTrain, and it's our pleasure, as always, to represent the Bentham team at tonight's event. And my partner in crime, Dr. Gareth Dyke. Gareth, where are you today?
I'm in London. No, I'm in London, in the center of London. So it's great to see you, Scott. How are you doing? How's everything with you?
Doing well. I knew the answer to that question already because you've been busy at the London Book Fair representing Bentham Science and other interested parties there. How is the London Book Fair this year?
It's been very, very busy. So you can probably hear in my voice. It's a bit kind of subdued, a bit quiet. But yeah, it's been fantastic. Thanks very much. All is good. Great to see everybody here today. Let's get some interaction going. Do let us know in the chat, like where you're joining us from, like maybe a little bit about your research background if you'd like to share that as well. That would be brilliant, right, Scott?
Yeah, it'll be great. Please introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, where you're joining us from, or perhaps what kind of research you're doing. I just switched on the chat for everyone, so feel free to say hello. Oh, we've got guests chiming in already. Guests from India already. Welcome, welcome. London. Oh, there's our guest from London. Is anyone else, by the way, joining the London Book Fair? If so, let us know in the comments. Fantastic. Oh, Hamburg, fantastic, lovely city. Indonesia, great. We've got researchers from all over the world. First, I wanted to say, Gareth, I have great respect for any researchers who are conducting science in English, if English is not your first language. It's a
Absolutely.
challenge, isn't it?
It is indeed, absolutely. And we work with researchers all over the world, helping with these kinds of questions, with these kinds of courses. So today we're going to be talking about sharpening your academic English for science communication, which is a really, really popular topic, right, Scott?
Absolutely. And as a native English speaker, I must apologize to the world. I'm sorry that you are forced to use English in science and science communication. It wasn't my idea. I feel sometimes spoiled and privileged to be have been born into a native English speaking country and family. And as I say, if English is not your first language, you have my greatest respect. And tonight, Gareth and I are going to share some tips that we have gathered working with researchers whose first language is not English, and also ourselves, we live in countries where the first language is not English, so we also experience it from the other side, don't we, Gareth?
Absolutely, absolutely. Scott lives in Japan. I live in Hungary. So we're both based in countries where a second language for us is being used as the primary means of communication. As you can see here on our intro slide, Scott is an expert university lecturer working on education technology, and I've been a journal editor and a university professor working with researchers all over the world, helping colleagues like, for example, Bentham Science. Scott.
Right. If you're joining us for the first time, if you've not joined our Bentham Science events before, there's a little bit about Bentham Science. It's founded in 1993, so just over 30 years old, by Dr. Atta, and it was founded with this idea of a publisher that was by scientists and for scientists. So Dr. Atta and the Bentham team care deeply about science and science ethics. Bentham is based in multiple points around the world. Amsterdam, as you can see, the Emirates, Singapore, um, a good number of very high quality and impact factor journals, both hybrid and open access, with a specialty in some of the so-called hard sciences, forgive me, my English is not good today, pharmacy, chemistry, biomed, and a little bit of psychology as well. A large number of high quality ebooks as well, and significant impact factors on many of those journals. And a key point of Bentham Science Publishers is the robust but efficient peer review process. And it's worth mentioning also, Bentham is listed in all the major indexes.
Absolutely. If you'd like to learn more about Bentham at any time, you can go to the two websites that we show here on the slides. At the end of this event today, well, tomorrow, you'll receive access to a recording and a certificate, right, Scott, for those attending the webinar today.
Absolutely. And I can see more guests coming in and introducing yourselves. Fantastic. We've got researchers coming in from Malaysia, South Africa. Wonderful. Fantastic. If you are a librarian or library sciences manager at your institution, then you can scan the QR code on your screen here and you can set your institution up for a free 3-month trial. And you can access the full Bentham collection absolutely free There's no obligation at all. You get all the Bentham journals, the impact factor journals included, and it's a great way to trial Bentham with absolutely no pain, no stress. Just scan the QR code and fill in a simple form, and the Bentham team will reach out to you and set you up with your free trial.
We'll show you that again at the end of the event in case you don't have time to scan it now, or indeed scan it, take a photo of this slide, share it with a friendly librarian that you might know, either at your institution or at another institution where you work. We're going to be talking about four topics today, Scott and I. What are we going to be talking about in our event today, Scott?
Great. Well, it's difficult to cover all of the academic English skills in just 1 hour, but we're going to try. We're going to cover the four skills: reading, writing, listening, and speaking as best that we can. So we'll go through these and offer some tips. And if you cannot catch everything, if we go a little bit too fast, as we sometimes do, there's a full recording coming your way. You can access the recording tomorrow at this time. We'll send out an email with a link to the full video. So if you miss any of our tips today, you can always go back and watch and review later. And feel free to share the link with your friends and colleagues. They can also sign up and watch the full event on demand.
Absolutely. So we're going to get started with academic reading and academic writing. And then in the second half of our event today, we'll talk about listening and speaking. So input and output skills in scientific communication. Right, Scott? We've been doing this kind of thing for a long time, so it should hopefully go quite well today. Let's hope for the
Hope so. And we don't usually touch on the input skills, so I'm excited for tonight's event. So let's kick off with academic reading. So this is a key skill for researchers, obviously. Let's start with a very quick poll. I'm curious how much we know about English native fluency around the world. I'm going to launch a quick poll here. Roughly what percentage of global researchers, like you, our guests, have English as their first language? Is it more than 90%, around 70, 50, 30, or fewer than 10? Gareth, would you care to take a guess?
Well, I don't know the answer to this. This is a new one on me, but I do know that it's going to be a surprising result for our audience members today. Even though English is the language that we are communicating science in, writing our papers in, actually, well, we'll see in the results of the poll how many researchers around the world actually have English as their first language. Scott, how's it going with the poll?
Great, our results are coming in. The answer is actually fewer than 10% currently. It's actually just dipped below 10. This is a study that I quoted from PubMed. And this is, of course, with the increase in publications coming from countries around the world, including developing countries. And now it's now fewer than 10% of
Surprising,
researchers around
really
the world.
surprising, isn't it?
Surprising,
It's
isn't
really,
it?
really,
Yeah.
really interesting. That's less than I would have thought, actually. I would have guessed
Hmm.
around maybe D or even C if I'd had been forced to actually go for a guess there. But that's interesting.
Some studies have pegged it as low as 7.5%. It's probably around closer to around 9 or 10. So it's interesting.
Wow.
So the point of this is you're not alone, first of all, if you're not a native English speaker, reader, listener, or writer. But also, this will be important when you get to Gareth's talk about writing. Writing for non-natives is also an important challenge to remember.
Yes, because the opposite, turn this around, the opposite way of looking at this is that most of the content, most of the research articles that get published around the world are actually written by non-native speakers. So let's get started with some reading skills. Scott?
Great. So obviously, reading is vitally important. In fact, our image of researchers is someone poring over books and poring through the literature. It's a classical image of the scientist, of the researcher, not just in the laboratory, but looking through the literature, trying to find gaps and insights. And it's not just research papers that take up a lot of our time as researchers. There's also, of course, articles, preprints, and so on. Gareth is a big proponent of preprints. There's also literature reviews, key part of the research process. Things like grants and proposals are also written in English. And of course, all the emails and the correspondence and the conferences that you attend, and all of this is typically all done in English. Again, I'm sorry, it wasn't my idea. It's a current reality of science communication. So it's a very important part of your research cycle is reading all these sources in English. So I have a question for you, Gareth. You are a very well published researcher. You've obviously read a lot of research. How do you typically navigate A research paper, where do your eyes go when you typically scan a paper or when you're perhaps when you're editing a manuscript, as we often do?
That's a really, really good question. Actually, for me, to the figures, first of all. So I would first of all look at the figures. Maybe that's me, but a picture is where I would go first of all when navigating a research article. And of course, the title and the abstract. And as an editor, as a peer reviewer, that's often where I go as well to get like that first kind of sense of the research article. And then, you'd also want to be going into the methods and the results. But as a researcher reading a paper, I would say the figures and then into the results before reading the abstract and the title. Scott?
That's very much the answer that I get when I anecdotally ask experienced researchers. And of course, we'll discover that article typically with a title and an abstract, scanning the databases. But when we jump into actually reading that paper, once we've downloaded it or found it in a journal, typically that's what I hear from researchers. They jump right to the figures and maybe look at the introduction and conclusion. And then, if they feel it's a paper that's worth their time, they'll dig into the details, the methods, and the results. This is a technique that was taught to me by my grad school advisor, which is a three-pass reading strategy. It's an interesting one. I see very variations of this technique all over the place. So the first pass is a scan. This is maybe what we're doing in those databases as we're looking for papers that we want to cite or that we want to analyze. You scan, the title, abstract, maybe look at the headings and the figures there, scan over them, and think, is this paper relevant to me? Is this going to offer something for my research? Does it serve my literature review? Does it represent a gap that I can exploit in my own research? Does it challenge my results and so on? So that quick scan will give you a sense if it's worth reading anymore. Second pass is to look through the structure of that paper, going through the introduction, the conclusion, skimming through those methods, as Gareth just mentioned. What did the researchers do and what did they find? Now, that's obviously mentioned in the abstract, but you want to go a little bit deeper and just see what structurally is happening in that paper. And then third pass is the detail, reading fully the manuscript and going through and taking careful notes and analyzing it critically, trying to understand all the claims and methods that the researchers would take. Gareth, is this something similar to how you would read a paper if you decide it's worth
Yeah.
reading?
Yeah, absolutely. It's also the way that I would review a paper as well. This is a good technique that you can apply if you get asked to do a peer review, for example. As well as it says here, like not every paper is going to deserve those three passes, but you'll learn pretty quickly when you get into the research literature, like, is this going to be something that's really critical for your research? If it is in your area, key for your research, then this three-pass reading strategy is a great technique. And of course, there are many AI tools that you can use as well to help you find literature and summarize literature as well, right, Scott?
Absolutely. We are big fans of AI tools to assist researchers, especially researchers whose first language is not English. We feel it's an ethical issue to empower researchers of all languages to be able to analyze, read, and write literature in English. So, um, thanks, Gareth, for your insights. Now, the signal phrases are something that I follow very carefully, especially when I'm editing a manuscript. If I don't feel that the manuscript is flowing well, the problem is usually in the signal phrases. On the other hand, if a paper reads really nicely and it reads like a narrative, like a story of discovery, probably the author and the editors or the language editors have done a great job with the signal phrases. They've explained the purpose, the results, and the interpretation by using these kinds of signal phrases to show the reader carefully where they're going. So a paper that reads really well usually has these kinds of signal phrases in place. And that will be important later when Gareth talks about writing. This is a great one for you, Gareth, to lend your input, reading like a reviewer. So these are some approaches you can take to, again, it's similar to the scanning approach that we talked about earlier, but this is focusing on how a peer reviewer might read your paper. First of all, what is the claim of the paper? What are the authors claiming? Have they claimed to solve a problem, and what is that problem that they're solving? What's the evidence, and how did they find that evidence? What methods did they use to acquire that? Were they the right methods? And are they clearly described? Are they replicatable? Can other researchers replicate those methods? And then third, what are the limits or limitations? Do the authors acknowledge any limitations in the study? And are there gaps that you as a researcher can exploit in your next paper? So these are perhaps three ways that a reviewer might approach this. There are many methods to review a paper, Gareth. one of my favorites of yours is the three-person, a three viewpoint approach as an author, was it as a peer and as a competitor? Could you tell us a little bit about that
Exactly,
method of
exactly. That's it, exactly. I mean, you get a paper to review, you get a paper to comment on. This is a really important transferable skill. You should do a positive job. It's really, really important to keep that in mind. Imagine if your boss gives you a paper to peer review, you'd want to do a positive, constructive job. So yeah, read it as a friend, read it as a colleague, and then read it as a competitor, and put the competitor comments in the middle so that those are, maybe going to be the more negative sets of comments. You can put those into the center section of the research article. Scott?
I love that. Sorry, I got that wrong. It's friend, colleague, and competitor, sort of three different perspectives, kind of varying levels of critical reading. I love that. I love that. Thank you. Thank you. I won't go through all of this, but the method on the left, critical, was one that was taught to me by a colleague of mine a few years ago. Uh, Dr. Lane, shout out. This is the critical method. It's credibility, recency, information quality, transparency, interpretation, confounders, accuracy, and limitations. If you'd like more details, I'll drop a link into the chat, but it's a great way to apply a systematic approach to critical reading. There's also a checklist on the right. I won't go through all of that. Feel free to take a screenshot or take a look at the video tomorrow. It's another approach to systematically, critically read a paper. You can develop your own sort of technique for this as well. One of my favorites is gaps. There are several ways to read a paper critically to find those gaps that you can then fill with your next paper. My favorite recently is the one at the bottom right, new problem arising since research. With the explosion of AI in nearly every research field, there are so many opportunities opening up for researchers because studies that were conducted pre-AI may be somewhat out of date now in the age of AI. For example, in my field of computer-aided language learning, this is absolutely true. The technology, excuse me, is changing so quickly that there are many, many new gaps to explore and exploit in your next paper. So look at these for some ideas on how to critically read a paper for finding gaps that you can then explore for your next paper. So we talked about reading, and as I always love to say, reading is the secret writing skill. Over to you, Professor Dyke.
Absolutely, absolutely. The better that you get at reading the work of others and bringing those tips, bringing that writing that you're experiencing into your own work, the better that you get at academic writing. So this is a great skill to develop, especially, of course, if English is not your first language, because you're engaging with written English and then using what you learn from the reading, as Scott mentioned, your secret superpower to writing a great paper, putting it into your own English writing. And there's a number of key misconceptions that we like to talk about in this context. Your manuscript is not just a written record of your findings, it's communicating your research, communicating your findings to the world. A well-written manuscript helps readers to quickly understand your message. Keep the writing simple. We're going to come back to that in a moment. Lots of non-native speakers, when they're taught English academic writing, they're taught to use long words, complicated words, long sentences. And that's actually not what we would recommend. And that's not what journal editors want to see in articles either. So we're aiming for correct facts, a professional, interesting style, keeping it as simple as possible. That's what journals want to see. And so a good starting point for a research article. Scott, do you want to jump in? Sorry, mate.
I just wanted to comment very quickly on that last slide. It's a great point that you had there about using complex words makes my writing more impressive. I think many of our guests joining us today have worked very hard to reach the high level of English that you have already achieved, and congratulations. What I often see then is researchers showing off their wonderful English and trying a bit too hard to make complex, long, and complicated sentences and use technical jargon that might not be relevant to their audience. So I would say, even if your English as you've achieved a very high level of English, the challenge for you is to keep your English simple and concise.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's also important to know who you're writing for. So first of all, you need to discover a target journal. And we always say this in all of our events. The best way to write a paper and get it published in a good journal, in a journal that will, do your work the justice it deserves, is to have that journal in mind before you begin the writing process. So which journal have you selected? What are its requirements and guidelines? And therefore, who is your audience? Who's going to read? Who's going to cite the paper? Will it be specialists, cross-disciplinary, as many of those higher impact factor journals are going to be, or is it a general audience? So knowing your audience before you start is critical. And keep in mind as well that when your paper goes to a journal, it will initially be considered by the desk editors before the paper gets sent out for peer review. So initially at the journal, the editors are going to be thinking about these questions. Does it fit? Is the message clear? Is it original? Is it important, true, and relevant to the readers of that journal? So if you keep this checklist in mind when you pick a journal, when you start to write, you're going to be in much better shape. Your chances of rejection will be an awful lot lower. Editors at journals tend to want these four elements in a research article so that they can assess it and potentially send it out for peer review. Is the study ethical? Is it well designed? Does the paper have novelty? Is it newsworthy? This is very important for those higher impact factor journals. They want to publish research that's going to attract a lot of interest, newsworthy stories. So, what are the real world implications of your study? Think about that when you put your message together, when you put your writing together. And of course, professionalism, as we've talked about before, is your English correct? Is it formatted? Does it match the journal style? These are key elements to think about. Think about what editors want as you start to put your paper together. So we often encourage people to prepare to write. Think about what to do before you start writing with your topic, your audience, that's your target journal. Of course, what's the purpose, and gather all of those supporting details so that you are ready to go with your writing. Message, audience, your target journal, and the structure of the writing are key elements to have in mind before you begin. Because really, as we'll talk about in the other parts of this event today, a research paper is a narrative, it's a story. Readers need to know where they've come from, where they are now, and where they're going. So, as we'll talk about, you need to link those different sections together logically, have a clear structure. This you will get, by the way, experience of by reading other papers, right, Scott? That's how you can learn to be better at doing all of this as a researcher.
Right, exactly. And as we're going to see, as I think you're going to explain next, this is where the signposting is so important, as we mentioned earlier, because not every reader is going to read the paper in a perfectly linear way. Even though the paper is a story and it should tell a compelling story of discovery, people will probably read the paper in various orders as you described earlier. You're probably going to read, scan through, jump to the figures and results, and then maybe jump to the conclusion, and then jump back and maybe dig into the details of the methods and so on. So all the more important to have clear signposting so that readers know where they're going no matter where they jump to in the paper. Just
So
wanted to mention that.
have a look at those slides that we showed, Scott showed a little bit earlier in this event with those linking phrases. Tell us about the right order, Scott. This is interesting, and we've talked about this in other events as well. But the way you read a paper is not necessarily the way that you'd write the paper, is it?
Right, and potentially there might even be three ways. It might be the way a paper is printed in a journal, the way that we read it, and the way that we write it. And this is called, this was taught to me by another colleague. This is the right order, WRITA. It's kind of a play on words. But the idea is that you write the methods and results first because that matches what you're naturally doing in your research cycle anyway. And this is also a great way to get peer feedback. If you're a graduate student, this is a great way to get feedback from your advisor. You do the methods and results and share that and get feedback on that. Hopefully, before you do your experiments, you get the methods checked. And it's a great way to kind of do a cycle by cycle peer feedback session on your paper as you're writing it, rather than trying to just do everything at once from the top down. It's not the best way, but this way, doing methods, results, and so on is a method that was taught to me and I think works very well.
It does. It really does work well. And the methods are easy to write. You've done all of them. You have that sequence. You have your lab book. The results you can write based around figures. Remember, I mentioned that when I read a paper, the first part that I usually jump to is often the figures. And so linking your ideas logically through the research article is absolutely key. And you've probably seen this before, the hourglass egg timer shape for a well-written research article, for a well-written academic paper. That introduction that starts off broad sets the general sense, like why is this paper interesting? What's the big implication? Then gets more specific down to the end of the introduction where you link, as Scott was saying, into the methods and results. You tell the readers what's going to happen next in the study. And then the discussion, of course, opposite, starts off very specific. What's the answer to the question that this paper seeks to address? And then gets much more broad as you move out towards the end of the paper, where you're going to be talking about the implications, the future work, and so on and so forth. Linking and structuring, very, very important. And we always get asked, don't we, Scott, about tenses in English. Which tense should I use in the different sections of my paper? And so we've summarized it here on this slide.
Right. And it's not a hard rule. There might be times when you use other tenses, but mostly in these sections, these are the verb tenses that you'll probably use. So maybe take a quick screen grab. But this is also important for the telling of the story, the narrative of this journey of discovery that you've made with your research paper. You want to tell a compelling narrative, even if people jump around and read it in different sections by sections, as we talked about earlier. If you have clear signposts, and you've got the right verb tenses for each section, the story will become much more clear for the reader, and it's easier for them to take away your key messages.
Yeah, no hard and fast rules, but this is generally what you want to do with your verb tenses in the different sections of your paper. And again, we also won't go through this in detail, but you will want to have a logical flow to your writing. You can have a look at the Bentham Science YouTube channel where recordings of other events that we've done specifically on academic writing, structuring research articles are presented, but precise language, clear sentences, structure of the writing, transitions between ideas, a coherent argument, and repeating those key ideas. In academic writing, it's very important to be repetitive so that people reading your paper, jumping from section to section, get the message that you want to sell with that research article. So, clear writing, logical flow, simple English, short sentences, subject and verb close together, active verbs rather than passive third person writing. That's what journal editors want to see. That's what makes your writing easier to read and easier to follow. So no unnecessary words and don't use jargon, because it may be familiar to you, but other people from other countries, non-native speakers, may not understand what you're talking about. So a phrase, for example, that I saw recently in a research article, the government should not let the grass grow under its feet on the issue of vaccine resistance. So that's jargon, and it's not clear to everybody what you're actually talking about, right, Scott?
Right. And it could apply to jargon. It could apply to idioms like that, the grass growing one. One that I saw recently in a manuscript that I was editing here in Japan was in the ballpark. Now, Japan is a very baseball-centric sports
Interesting.
culture, as is the United States and Canada and other countries. So they use baseball idioms and things sometimes in
Yes.
papers. So jargon, idioms, these kinds of things are best left out of your professional paper.
Try to keep that in mind. Yeah, I remember reading about an English mathematician who always used cricket analogies in all of his mathematics papers, which of course made sense to him, but no sense to many other people around the world who don't understand cricket. So there we go. We're talking about writing concisely, helping your readers. So here's an example that Scott put together. What can you do with a big, long phrase such as the one at the top, which really is like a train of thought, like somebody's written down thoughts as they've come into their head. It can be expressed, as you can see in this great example, in a much shorter, more concise way. So all of that information in the top phrase condensed down into one sentence. And by the way, you can do this very, very easily using AI. If you've got a lot of text, an idea that's very long and complicated, ask your favorite AI tool to shorten it down to one sentence. That's a great technique that we use all the time. And unnecessary words, cut them out of your writing. It has long been known that. Correct to an order of magnitude, almost reached significance. They're not necessary. And use simple rather than complex words. As we talked about earlier, this is often taught. It's not what journals want. It's not what editors want. They want simple, easy to understand English that is going to be accessible to everybody all around the world. And also, numbers are always better than adjectives. Numbers in academic writing make you look credible. They bring credibility. So you don't want to say things like significant improvement, substantial increase, meaningful reduction, important findings. Give the readers numbers. Be quantitative. That's going to create a great deal of credibility. And of course, as Scott will say, as Scott will attest, using AI can really help in this context, right? Scott, you can use your AI tools to help you do better with factual writing.
Right. AI can definitely help us with the form of our writing. And this is why I love AI for researchers whose first language is not English. It helps take away that barrier. But at the same time, we mustn't use AI to correct the content. That really still depends on us as researchers. So use AI as a tool to help you level the playing field for language issues, but we still have to take responsibility as authors for our content and our science.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, as I mentioned, if you need more information about writing academic articles or English communication or the structure of academic papers, get in touch with us afterwards or have a look at the Bentham Science YouTube channel. Proofreading is great. It's your approach to catch all of those mistakes. So do this, read out your work, to the cat, to the dog, to the goldfish, to the mirror. Just read your work out loud. It will help you to catch all of those small errors, proofread your work, ask your favorite AI tool to check your work as well. So, we've talked so far in our event about academic reading and academic writing. Let's move on now and talk a little bit about listening strategies for researchers. Scott?
Okay, great. Thanks. So we're going to another input skill now, listening strategies. So as researchers, we spend a lot of time listening to presentations, whether it's at conferences, seminars, webinars like this one. So let's look at how to maybe make that a little bit easier and more efficient for you. Because understanding spoken English in all of these research settings is a very important and sometimes underestimated skill. So in this section, we'll look at some practical tips. So these are some situations where, I'll just go back to that slide for a second here. Probably most researchers are familiar with these and you've experienced these situations, conferences, webinars, and so on. But there's also meetings, department talks, and all kinds of other situations. So you may have to use your English listenings and note-taking skills in all of these situations and more. So I think you already know why listening can be difficult. Again, Gareth and I completely understand because we live in countries where English is not the first language. So we understand how you feel if you're a non-native English speaker or listener using English in those situations. Accents and pronunciation can be a barrier even for native speakers. English is now a global language of science, tech, and business. So that means more and more people from different cultures and different languages, mother tongues, speaking English. There is a wonderful rainbow of sounds, dialects, and accents of English. I love them all personally. I don't want anyone to remove their accents. I love them. So please keep them, but be mindful that when we are using English in global situations, there's going to be all kinds of different accents, and some of them might not be easy for you to catch. There's speed and delivery. Sometimes many native speakers, including us, Gareth, we sometimes talk too fast. Forgive us, please. And there's a lot of information to cover in these talks. There's also a lot of technical words used. If you're not a specialist in that field, it may be challenging. And of course, a lot of dense information. People rush through talks and try to pack everything in. So listening can be a challenge, even for natives. So what can we do? Well, here is one tip is to think structurally. So there's a way to approach a listening task from more of an organizational viewpoint, right? On the left-hand side, we've got relevance, right? The problem that's being stated and the results and findings. On the right-hand side, we've got the approach that they used and the details they used. That's probably more detailed language, also the conclusions and the implications. On the upper side, for problem and method, we've got something we call high focus listening. And then on the bottom, we've got outcomes. Now you can sort of organize your listening and note taking around these things. You don't need to catch every detail. Try to listen to the talk structurally. Maybe take visual notes instead of just noting down words. Try to get a sense of what the researchers are saying and how they're structuring their information. We mentioned signpost phrases in reading. They're just as important in speaking and listening to talks if you're taking notes. Probably some of these might be easy for most of our high level English speaking guests today, but they're also great to use as signposts in your presentations, and they might help you to follow the narrative of the talk. So listen for these and other similar signpost phrases as you listen and take notes to a science talk. Note taking is a skill. I'm still trying to improve my note taking. Gareth, I'm sure you have some tips as well, but some tips that I've learned from fellow researchers are things like using symbols and again, taking visual diagrams. This is something that I love to do on my iPad. If I'm listening to a science talk, I try to listen visually and take some scribble notes with my Apple Pencil or just a notepad and paper is works just as well. I try to listen for the major ideas, especially if I'm listening to something in Japanese. I might not be able to catch every word, but if I'm catching the major points, I'm listening for the problem the researchers are solving, their key results, and maybe something unexpected findings or negative results that they might be talking about. And if I have questions, I'll write them down with a little Q or a question mark. So you don't have to write everything down. Gareth, any tips for note taking if you're listening to a science talk?
Well, I mean, these days, if it's an online talk, you can get your, chatbot to attend the meeting and take notes for you. That's a great technique. We're seeing that more and more in good and bad situations. So that's one way. Of course, as well, you could record, with your phone if you're in a like in-person presentation, make a transcription later, then feed that transcription in again to your favorite AI tool and get the notes, that you need to get the key message out. But yeah, this is fantastic ideas. We all attend talks all of the time.
It's great. It's interesting. I'm the technologist, but I gave the low tech advice and you gave the high tech advice. So that's interesting. I noticed that at my lectures at university, I always see the students, put the smartphones on the on their desks and
Well,
hit record as my talk begins.
you should
So
ask first, right? I mean, that's something that I would say. Really, I mean, it's just polite, right, to ask first before you start recording somebody, but that's just my opinion. Anyway, really, really cool. I
sure.
mean, what have we talked about so far, Scott, in this event today?
Great. So that concludes our quick tips for listening strategies and note taking. And that leads us to another output skill. Gareth, tell us about effective scientific speaking. You're a wonderful
Blimey.
speaker. I'm always learning from you. So let's learn some tips from Gareth
Scientific
about
speaking. Fantastic. Yeah,
speaking.
absolutely. Absolutely. We'll start with a poll, though, I think, just to make sure everybody's still awake in this event.
Okay, I want to see how confident our guests feel about speaking in English. There's no wrong answer here. Just curious to see what you think. Do you feel very confident, A? Do you feel B, somewhat confident? C, not very confident? D, absolutely terrified. Now, if I'm thinking in Japanese, I would be somewhere between a B and a C. It depends on the situation.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel somewhat confident in Japanese. Sometimes I feel not very confident. I kind of flip between B and C. I wonder what our guests feel about speaking in
I
English.
saw that absolutely terrified was one of the first responses that we got in this poll. It's interesting because when you look at like lists of things that people are afraid of, like the biggest fears that people have,
Mhm.
spiders, heights, the dark, I don't know.
Snakes. Yep.
Yeah, speaking in public is always on that top 10 list, and it's often close to the top of the list, right?
It's typically a top three. Almost every survey of people's worst fears is public speaking. So yes, it's a very common pain point for people, especially if you're speaking in a language that's not your native or mother tongue. Let's end the poll here and see what our guests said. I'll share the results. So actually, we've got a fairly confident group of speakers here. Congratulations. If you are in category D, absolutely terrified, don't worry, you're not alone. It's a very common feeling, as Gareth said. Many people greatly fear public speaking. So
Yeah, well, you
yeah,
can
thanks
learn
everyone.
it. You can learn it, right? I mean, it's a skill, right? Like anything, like driving a car, like playing the trumpet, like riding a bike, like, and Scott and I have worked on this ourselves, like over the years, taken courses, talked to other people, watched other people give presentations, picked up tips from the way other people do online and in-person presentations, right? Scott, we're certainly better at it than we were like a few years ago, right?
Yes, and still learning. If I look back at recordings of webinars that we gave 5 years ago, I cringe watching myself in those videos. I'll probably watch this 3 years from now and think, oh, I was terrible. I've learned so much since then. So it is a skill that you develop over time. And Gareth, you're going to share some of those
Yeah.
skills with us now.
We also seem to be getting younger, which is weird. Features of presentations. Have a think about your purpose, your audience, and your style. What kind of talk are you going to be giving? Just like writing a paper, writing a research article, what kind of presentation is it that you're going to be giving? Is it international, local, mostly English, non-natives, mostly academics, or mostly non-academics? Should the style be formal? Informal? Is the group going to be large or small? Will it be online or face to face? So that's a great tip to get us started. We always ask when we get invited to give a research presentation, how big will the audience be? Who's going to be in the audience? Questions like that to get yourself some idea about putting the presentation together. And there's a big difference, isn't there, between writing a research article and giving a research presentation. As you can see summarized here graphically, in your article, you're going to have the methods and results, in equal amounts, probably in that research article. Whereas in your research presentation, much more focus on the results, of course, and much more focus on illustrations of your results. Less information, introduction, methods. Don't forget to leave time for that good old Q&A at the end. But the bones, the basis, the core of your research presentation will be talking about the results, what they mean, and illustrating them for people graphically. So before you begin, before you start to put together a research presentation, have a think as you would when you're writing a research article. What's the one thing I want my audience to walk away from this presentation having learned, thinking about, and repeatedly emphasize that? There's a technique that we call the three, three repeats technique. I forget the name exactly, but you see newsreaders doing this. You see preachers, religious leaders doing this, right, Scott? Repeating that message 3 times in a presentation.
Right. I think we'll mention that a bit later. And then another question that I got recently from a researcher is, okay, this is good advice, but what is the one thing? What should I emphasize? Well, it's your key findings, obviously. What problems have you solved or aimed to solve with your paper? What mystery have you solved? What problem have you solved? That's probably the most important thing to mention. Is there anything else that you would want researchers to repeat as their main message, Gareth?
No, I mean, that's it, right? That's what you want people to come away from a research presentation with having in their mind, like that message, that key element. Keep it simple. One idea per slide as well. And here's a picture of my grandmother. You will want to have something that is easy to understand. So a technique that we often teach people, we use it a lot in our presentations, is your research output, your research message clearly and easily understandable? Could your grandmother understand it? Could the bus driver understand it, for example? So this is a great technique. You're going to be asked about this in research presentations, in job interviews, right?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I know it might seem ridiculous. Most probably guests today are not often talking about their research with their grandmother or their bus driver, but it's a great point that Gareth raises here. You should be able to explain to lay people in English the importance of your findings. This is something that I do with my mom. My mom is 83 years old, and if I want to explain something about the work I'm doing, I know that if I can explain it to her, and she's a retired biologist, so she's certainly smart, but she doesn't work in my field. If I can explain what I'm doing in computer-aided language learning to my mother, a retired biologist who's 83 years old, then probably I've done a good job of keeping it simple and concise and easy to understand. So
Yep,
that slide there is to help us to explain
absolutely.
to lay people audiences what we do.
And it's a great technique for PhD students, for young researchers. You should train yourself to be able to explain your research to other researchers, to other people in simple and easy to understand ways. You're going to get asked that. You need to train yourself to be able to do it. And you do this effectively by using simple, semi-formal language. So rather than saying substantial research has been performed, say a lot of research has been done. You can see some examples here, not completely informal, but nevertheless semi-formal, easy to understand, easy to take away. What we did study was we found the opposite. Why was that? And on this graph, here you can see. So point out to people what you're talking about in your presentation. Speak slowly and loudly. Pause for emphasis. Sound enthusiastic. I mean, it's obvious perhaps, but we've all attended those online events where the speaker is obviously not really interested in being there, right, Scott? We've seen that a lot. And if you put a bit of energy in,
Mhm.
people remain engaged.
Absolutely. And I think if you are nervous about using your academic English in an academic setting or a conference setting, then focus on these skills because they're just as important. The skills that Gareth mentioned, using a variety of tones of voice, using pauses for emphasis or to help people to think and digest what you've said. And it's just as true for the next slide for some of the non-verbal cues as well. This is where you can use your body language to show your confidence. Gareth, any tips? You've done a lot of conferences. How
Well,
important is nonverbal
I think it's
communication?
extremely important because you can use your hands to emphasize things that you're talking about. You can move naturally. You can lean in when you do online presentations, as Scott is demonstrating. You can use a good posture, even in a webinar, in an online presentation like this. You can make eye contact. You can point things out. You
Mhm.
can engage people by using a variety of these techniques as you talk to the audience, not to your slides. And we see that often in the way people
Mhm.
give presentations. They're talking to the wall, they're talking to the slides. Talk to the audience. You are the presentation, you are the presenter. You should be the focus of attention. The slides are visual aids, and they're called visual aids for a reason, right, Scott? They're not the focus of the presentation.
That's true, absolutely, especially if it's a poster or a slide talk. And just going back to that previous slide for a moment, if I could change one thing, I would make the person's posture here a bit more rounded. One tip I love to give researchers giving talks is to make your body language a bit round. Sometimes even me, when we're doing these events and I'm leaning into the microphone, I see my shoulders go up, and then I watch the recording and I think, oh, I forgot to kind of lean back and round my shoulders. As human beings, we feel more relaxed when the person's body language is a bit more round. So when you're standing, you can sort of hold your hands like this. You can point with an open hand as you point to people. Round shapes in your body language will help other people to relax more. So I think the figure on our slide here, I'm going to edit later so that her elbows are less pointy.
And here's some examples of how you can use hand gestures, as Scott was just saying. Yes, I agree. 1, 2, 3 points we're going to make in this presentation, showing the scale of things, for example, asking somebody to repeat their questions and, gestures that we use to, mean data collection or something is unknown, right, Scott?
And these are fairly universal. I know that gestures vary from culture to culture, and there's some gestures that I know I'm not supposed to use in some countries, but these are, I think, fairly universal. You can use at any international conference.
Here's what we talked about before, the method to emphasize repeatedly your key takeaway message. At the beginning of your talk, it's a great technique to say initially what you're going to talk about. In this presentation, we're going to talk about these 4 elements, as you may remember that we did at the start of this webinar today. Then you give the audience the information, you say it in the presentation, And then, of course, you will need to wrap up at the end by summarizing what you've talked about. So this is the three element technique that we would recommend that you use in your presentations. It gives everybody that structure, and it means that people are definitely going to go away knowing what you talked about. And let me also say that you can practice, as we talked about before. Scott and I practice all the time. It builds confidence. The more you do this, the more you do online presentations, the better you get at them, better you get at, doing a confident job. Learn your talking points, right, Scott? Let's not memorize a script. Outlines are okay, but no reading from a script.
I know it is difficult, especially if you haven't achieved a higher level of fluency yet in your target language. I know for me, I can remember doing presentations in Japanese where I was just reading from a script. It's better to have outlines, and even if your English isn't perfect, it will feel more natural and you'll be able to communicate your ideas better if you're just going from an outline and talking more from your expertise and your knowledge rather than just reading a script.
Yeah, it doesn't look great if you're reading out from a script, but you can build those talking points to put the presentation together. Record yourself, see how you look in a recording, and then learn from that. And don't forget to prepare some Q&A as well, because you will get asked questions at the end of your talk. If you're prepared for those questions, that's a good thing, right? So here we go. Let's do that third element of a well-structured talk right now. Scott, what have we talked about in our event today?
Great, we're seeing it 3+ times. Today we've looked at academic reading, ways to make your reading more efficient. We talked about academic writing. Gareth walked us through some ways to improve our manuscripts for international audiences. We talked about listening and note-taking strategies for efficient listening at conferences and talks. And Gareth walked us through scientific speaking tips. Gareth, we managed to get through all four skills today, and I wanted to ask our guests, now that we've talked about those four scientific English skills, let's see which skills you'd most want to improve. You can select more than one. So after listening today, what do you feel you most want to improve in your academic or scientific English? I'm curious.
What was that you said? What was that you said? Well, I think I need to improve my listening skills. What about you, Scott?
Well, it's a good question. If I'm flipping it over and thinking in my target language, which currently is Japanese, then I would say probably my writing is where I would most like to improve my academic skills. I feel I could probably achieve a little bit more formal level of scientific Japanese and also vocabulary I need to improve. So I think writing is probably my weakest skill for
Yeah,
my target language.
same here, same here. What does our poll show?
Let's take a look and see what our guests said. I'll share the results here. Interesting. Most of our audience feels the same as me. Writing is the number one most desired skill upgrade, followed by, that was at 17 out of 19 who answered. 9 out of 19 said speaking, 5 out of 19 said listening, and 2 out of 19 said reading. That's great. Well, I'm happy to see that much confidence in reading skills because it's such an important skill for researchers. So that's great. And I'm not at all surprised to see that writing is the number one most wanted skill upgrade.
Fantastic, fantastic. And thank you everybody for your kind comments in the chat. I was just looking at the chat while Scott was talking there. It's great to see you all here. Thank you for the comments. We're glad that these presentations are useful, helping you with your teaching, sharing them with your students. Do have a look at the Bentham Science YouTube channel. It's really a great place, a fantastic resource for additional presentations like this one. Scott?
Great. And if there are any Q&A questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A or the chat. Or if you have a question that pops into your head, you can always email us. We'll be sending you an email tomorrow with the full video recording and a certificate of attendance. So if you have any questions about four-skill English for science communication, feel free to reply to that email. You can reach me directly from there. And we'll, if we don't have an answer for you, we will try to get an answer for you. And a big thank you to everyone for making time today. And on behalf of Bentham Science Publishers, thank you very much. And thank you, Gareth, for presenting today.
Yeah, you too, Scott. Always great to do these events together. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been lots of fun to do this one today. I'm sorry if there was a little bit of background noise from my side, but nevertheless, Have a great day, and I'll look forward to viewing the recording with everybody else tomorrow. Scott?
Thank you, Gareth, and thanks everyone so much for joining. We wish you the best of success with your research, your publishing, with your publishing impact, and with improving your academic English. I'll continue working to improve my academic Japanese. So, wishing you all the best, and thanks so much to our sponsors, Bentham Science. You can check out the links in the chat there. Check out the YouTube channel and follow Bentham on these social media channels. And Bentham is looking forward to reading your research in their books and journals. So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Gareth, again. Thank you to Bentham Science.